I walked into my 32nd birthday party clutching a life-changing contract and a secret heartbeat growing inside me. I expected cake and champagne, but my husband handed me divorce papers in front of our entire family. He thought he had exposed a traitor, but his paranoia only lit the fuse for a devastation that would silence the room. By the time the truth came out, he was the one wishing he had never been born. My name is Elena, and as I pulled into the gravel driveway of my in-laws' lake house in the suburbs of Chicago, I truly believed my life had reached its peak perfection. The sprawling property was already glowing with the golden hue of string lights draped across the porch, a beacon of warmth against the cooling evening air. Inside, I knew there were over 30 of our closest family members and friends waiting to celebrate my 32nd birthday. The air would be thick with the scent of Rose's famous apple pie and the sound of jazz playing softly on the vintage turntable. It was the kind of picture-perfect domestic bliss I had worked so hard to build, a stark contrast to the cold sterility of the medical office I had just left. I was running 20 minutes late, a detail that usually would have sent my anxiety spiking, but tonight I felt nothing but a serene, bubbling joy. My hand instinctively went to my leather handbag resting on the passenger seat. Tucked safely inside was a white envelope, distinct from the business contracts I usually carried. It held the first grainy black and white image of our future, a 12-week-old secret that was currently the size of a plum. This was supposed to be the night I told Daniel. It was the cherry on top of a week that had already been momentous. Just yesterday, I had finalized the most lucrative contract in the history of my company, Aura Design, securing our financial future for the next decade. I felt invincible, wrapped in the armor of success and impending motherhood. I stepped out of the car and smoothed down my dress, taking a deep breath of the pine-scented air before opening the heavy oak front door. The noise hit me first, a cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses that washed over me like a warm embrace. But as I moved deeper into the foyer, shedding my coat, I looked for the one face that mattered. I found Daniel standing by the stone fireplace in the living room, but the welcoming smile I expected was nowhere to be found. He looked like a stranger wearing my husband's clothes. His posture was rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped a tumbler of scotch, and his eyes were rimmed with red, staring at me with a cold, hollow intensity that made my stomach drop. Before I could even wave, Daniel reached over and abruptly cut the music. The silence was instant and violent. The laughter died in throats. Conversations were severed mid-sentence, and the clink of silverware ceased. The room went from a festive celebration to a mausoleum in the span of a single heartbeat. Every eye in the room, all 30 pairs, swiveled from him to me. Confused, I forced a smile and took a step toward him, assuming he was about to make a toast. "Daniel," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. I reached out to embrace him, needing to bridge the sudden, terrifying distance between us. He recoiled as if I were contagious. With a sneer that twisted his handsome features into something ugly, he grabbed a thick, yellow envelope from the mantel and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table between us. The slap of heavy paper against glass echoed like a gunshot. "Happy birthday, Elena," he announced, his voice steady and loud enough for the neighbors down the lake to hear. "Here is your gift. Divorce papers." A gasp rippled through the room. I heard his mother, Rose, let out a strangled cry of horror from the kitchen doorway. I stood frozen, my hand still clutching the strap of my bag, the leather digging into my palm. Inside that bag was the image of his child, the gift I had been so desperate to give him. Now, it felt like a heavy stone weighing me down. My mind could not process the words. Divorce. It made no sense. We were happy. We were trying for a baby. I had just secured our future. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask if this was some kind of sick joke, but Daniel cut me off with a look of pure venom. "Do not stand there and act surprised," he spat, stepping closer so his shadow fell over me. "Stop the acting. Elena, I know exactly what you have been doing with that director during your little weekend business trips. You come home smelling like sandalwood and musk. Daniel sneered, pacing the Persian rug like a prosecutor in a cheap courtroom drama, his voice dripping with contempt. You think I am stupid. Elena, you think I do not notice the late nights, the way you hide your phone screen, or the money disappearing from our joint account. He was manic, ticking off his list of grievances on his fingers while our guests watched in horrified silence. He claimed the scent on my coat was expensive men's cologne, completely ignoring the fact that I had spent the last month carrying cedar and leather fabric samples for the new hotel lobby project. Before I could even open my mouth to correct him, he pivoted to the main attraction of his delusion. You are sleeping with Marcus, he accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. That is the only reason you got that contract. You traded your body for a promotion while I sat here like a fool supporting you. The accusation hit me like a physical slap. Marcus was 60 years old, happily married, and had been a mentor to me since I was an intern. But Daniel was not interested in logic. He reached into his jacket pocket and whipped out a crumpled piece of paper, thrusting it toward my face. It was a bank statement, highlighting specific lines with aggressive yellow marker. The Grand Meridian Hotel. He read aloud, his voice booming off the high ceilings. 3 weekends in a row, $500 a night. Explain that. Elena, explain why my wife is spending her weekends at a luxury hotel downtown while telling me she is working late at the office. My father, Frank, stepped forward from the crowd, his face purple with suppressed rage. Daniel, that is enough, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. You are drunk. We are going to the study to talk about this like men, or you are going to regret the next word that comes out of your mouth. Daniel laughed, a harsh, barking sound that lacked any humor. No, Frank. We are not going anywhere. I want everyone here to see who she really is. I want to unmask the dutiful daughter and perfect wife. I tried to keep my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. Daniel, those were bid meetings. The design team rented a suite to work around the clock for the Anderson proposal. You know this. I told you this. A likely story. Daniel scoffed, turning his back on me to address the room. She lies so easily, just like she lies about why we cannot conceive. The room went from silent to suffocating. He was crossing a line that should never be crossed. Our struggle with infertility had been a 3-year private hell, a landscape of negative tests and silent tears. To weaponize it here, now, was an act of supreme cruelty. You have been distant for months, he shouted, his eyes wild. You recoil when I touch you. You are always tired. You are always sick. And now I know why. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space, his breath hot and smelling of scotch. You do not want me to touch you because you are already getting your fill somewhere else. You are too full of him to want your husband. The vulgarity of his words hung in the air, gross and suffocating. My mother-in-law gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. I looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and for the first time, I did not see the man I loved. I saw a small, terrified boy masquerading as a tyrant. I realized then that this was not about Marcus, or the hotel, or even the baby we could not seem to make. This was about him. This was the accumulation of years of his own insecurity, his failing startup, and his inability to handle my success. He needed to destroy me to feel tall again. Something inside me snapped. The trembling in my hands stopped. The tears that had been threatening to spill evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I straightened my spine and looked him dead in the eye. The fear was gone. Are you sure you want to do this right now? Daniel, I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. He did not hesitate. Sign the papers and get out of my life. He spat. I nodded once. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at the guests. I reached down, picked up the yellow envelope from the coffee table, and turned my back on him. I walked out of the party, through the stunned silence, and out the front door without shedding a single tear. I drove until the manicured lawns and safe streetlights of the suburbs faded into the grimy, industrial outskirts of the city. I did not go to the Grand Meridian, nor did I check into any of the five-star establishments where the staff knew my name and preferred wine vintage. I needed to disappear. I pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of a motel called the Roadside Inn, a place where the neon vacancy sign buzzed with an irritating, flickering hum. It was the kind of place people went to when they did not want to be found. And tonight, that was exactly what I needed. Once the heavy door of room 204 clicked shut behind me, the adrenaline that had sustained me through the exit finally evaporated. My legs gave out, and I barely made it to the cramped bathroom before I fell to my knees. I retched violently into the toilet, my body purging the stress and the nausea that had been my constant companion for the last few weeks. This was not just the heartbreak, it was the morning sickness that seemed to strike at all hours. I sat on the cold tile floor for a long time, shivering, resting my forehead against the porcelain until the room stopped spinning. When I finally gathered the strength to stand, I washed my face and walked back into the dim bedroom. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress and reached into my bag. My hand trembled as I pulled out the ultrasound image again. In the harsh light of the bedside lamp, the grainy black and white picture looked like a miracle. 12 weeks. The doctor said the heartbeat was strong. I traced the curve of the tiny spine with my thumb. We had conceived on our 5th wedding anniversary, 3 months ago. It was the one night in the last year where Daniel had seemed like his old self, where we had laughed and made love without the shadow of his bitterness hanging over us. I stared at the photo, and the memories of the last few months began to rearrange themselves in my mind. I saw the pattern now. I saw the way he would snap at me for looking at my phone, accusing me of hiding messages when I was just checking emails. I remembered how he would sulk whenever I mentioned a new client or a bonus. He had become obsessed with money, yet secretive about his own. He constantly made jokes about how much more I earned, but the punchlines always landed with a cruel thud. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me. It was a text from Sarah, his sister. She wrote that Daniel was drunk and destroying the living room. She said he was smashing vases and screaming about how I had ruined his life, playing the victim to an audience of horrified relatives. He truly believed it. He had convinced himself that he was the injured party. That was when the realization hit me, cold and sharp. This was not about Marcus. This was not about me cheating. This was about Daniel failing. I knew his startup was struggling, but I had never pressed him on the details because he was so sensitive about it. He was projecting his own feelings of inadequacy onto me. If I was a cheater, then he was the martyr. If I was the villain, then his business failures did not matter because his wife destroyed him. He needed me to be the bad guy so he could feel like a man again. My phone rang, displaying Marcus's name. I took a deep breath, pushing down the urge to sob, and answered with my professional voice. Marcus was frantic, apologizing for being dragged into this mess and worried about the company's reputation. I cut him off gently. I told him I was safe and that I would handle it. I promised him that Aura Design would not suffer because of my husband's breakdown. After I hung up, I stared at the blank screen. I could call Daniel. I could drive back there and scream the truth until my throat bled. But words meant nothing to a man drowning in paranoia and scotch. He would just twist my words. I needed something he could not argue with. I needed a weapon made of undeniable facts. I grabbed the motel notepad and a cheap pen. My hand was steady now as I wrote the header, the 48-hour plan. Underneath, I listed my targets. First, the medical records proving the conception date. Second, the security footage from the hotel to prove my alibi. Third, and most importantly, I needed to dig into Daniel's finances to see exactly how deep his failure went. The night of my 32nd birthday ended with me sitting in a cheap chair by the window, watching the headlights of trucks passing on the highway. I placed my hand flat against my stomach, feeling a fierce protectiveness surge through me. I was done crying. The sadness had crystallized into a resolve harder than diamond. "You want the truth, Daniel," I whispered to the empty room, my reflection in the glass staring back with eyes of steel. "I will give you the truth." The sun had barely crested the horizon when I sat across from Arthur Bennett, the fiercest family law attorney in the city. I did not waste time discussing the division of furniture or who would keep the wedding china. I told him clearly that my priority was protecting my professional reputation and securing absolute, sole custody of the child Daniel did not even know existed yet. Arthur listened, took notes, and by the time I left his office, he had already drafted a restraining order and a defamation suit that would leave Daniel penniless if he breathed another word of his lies to the public. My next stop was the obstetrics clinic. I needed science, not sentiment. I demanded a detailed medical report from my doctor, specifically requesting the estimated date of conception based on the fetal biometrics. The printout was clinical and cold, but it told a story that Daniel could not refute. The conception date aligned perfectly with our 5th anniversary trip to Lake Geneva, the only weekend we had been away together in 6 months. Unless I had teleported to Chicago to sleep with someone else, the biological father could only be Daniel. From the clinic, I drove straight to the Grand Meridian. I did not go to the front desk. I went straight to the general manager, a man whose hotel I had redesigned 2 years ago. I requested the security footage from the lobby and the conference suites for the 3 specific weekends Daniel had circled on the bank statement. The manager hesitated but eventually complied when I explained that my career was on the line. We sat in the security booth, watching the monitors. The footage was undeniable. It showed me entering the hotel, not with a lover, but with a team of 5 people. There was my female assistant, 2 senior architects with gray hair, and a structural engineer. We were seen entering a conference room at 8 in the morning and not leaving until 3 the following morning, our arms full of blueprints and take-out coffee cups. I asked for digital copies of every single frame. By noon, I was sitting in the private dining room of a downtown club with Marcus and his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor was a titan in the city's financial sector, a woman who could crush careers with a phone call. When I laid out Daniel's accusations, her face turned a terrifying shade of calm. She was insulted that her husband was being painted as an adulterer, but she was furious that a man like Daniel thought he could drag her family name through the mud. She wrote a sworn affidavit on the spot, confirming that Marcus was at a charity gala with her on 2 of the nights in question, and that their relationship with me was strictly professional. She handed me the paper and told me that she was helping me not just for Marcus, but to teach my husband a lesson about respect. I spent the afternoon with a forensic accountant and a private investigator I had hired to look into the one thing Daniel was truly secretive about his money. I suspected his paranoia was a smokescreen for something else, and I was right. The investigator handed me a file that made my blood run cold. Daniel had forged my signature to take out a second mortgage on our home 3 months ago. He had taken that money, nearly $200,000, and dumped it into a high-risk cryptocurrency scheme that had crashed and burned within weeks. I flipped to the next page and felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. The mysterious expenses he had screamed about at the party, the money he claimed I was spending on hotel rooms, were actually transfers I had made to a hidden savings account. I had been saving that money to pay off the credit card debt he had racked up last year, planning to surprise him by clearing the balance. I had been cleaning up his financial mess while he was busy inventing a moral one for me. I took every piece of evidence, the medical timeline, the security footage stills, the affidavits from Marcus and Eleanor, and the damning financial report and placed them into a sleek black leather portfolio. I ran my hand over the cool leather. This was no longer just a defense. It was an eviction notice. Every piece of paper inside was a sharp blade, ready to cut through the web of lies Daniel had spun. I was ready. While I was methodically assembling the instruments of my defense, the atmosphere back at the lake house had descended into a suffocating gloom. Sarah later described the scene to me, painting a picture of a family fracturing under the weight of Daniel's performance. My mother-in-law, Rose, had spent the entire morning trying to reason with him, pleading with him to reconsider the destruction of our marriage. But Daniel remained obstinate. He sat in the center of the living room like a tragic hero, spinning a narrative where he was the devoted husband cast aside by an ambitious, heartless wife. He told his aunts and uncles that I had changed the moment I was promoted. He claimed I looked down on him, that I treated him like an accessory rather than a partner. The seed of doubt he planted was watered by a distant cousin who decided to insert herself into the drama. She chimed in, claiming she had seen me laughing over dinner with a strange man at a bistro in the city a few weeks ago. She conveniently omitted the fact that the man was 60 years old and the table was covered in fabric swatches. But the damage was done. The family nodded in sympathy, their biases confirming the lie. My father, Frank, tried to cut through the noise. He called Daniel, intending to talk sense into him, but the conversation was short and brutal. My father called him a coward for making a scene instead of talking to me privately. Daniel's response was to hang up and block my father's number, effectively cutting off the only voice of reason that could challenge his version of events. However, not everyone was buying the act. Sarah, Daniel's younger sister, felt that something was fundamentally wrong with his story. While the rest of the family was coddling him, she drove out to the business park where Daniel's startup was located. She intended to get his laptop to help him with some work he claimed was urgent, but when she arrived at the building, she found the glass doors locked and the lights off. A notice taped to the inside of the glass stated that the unit had been vacated 30 days ago for non-payment of rent. Sarah called me immediately, and I could hear the devastation in her voice. She was crying, struggling to get the words out. She told me that he had not been to work in a month. She told me that the office was gone and that he had been leaving the house every morning dressed for work, only to go who knows where, lying to me, to his parents, and to everyone we knew. That was the final piece of the puzzle. The realization washed over me with clarity. Daniel was not attacking me because he thought I was cheating. He was attacking me to cover the shame of his own collapse. By painting me as the villain who destroyed our family with infidelity, he could hide the fact that he had destroyed our finances with incompetence. If he divorced me as the victim, he saved his pride. If he admitted he was bankrupt and unemployed while I was thriving, he lost his manhood. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to control the narrative. Sarah asked me what she should do, threatening to expose him right then and there. I told her to stop. I needed her to stay quiet for just 24 hours more. I told her to let him think he had won, to let him feel safe in his deception. I promised her I would return the following evening to end it properly. Shortly after hanging up with Sarah, my phone pinged with an email from Daniel. It was a barrage of insults, urging me to sign the papers immediately to save myself further humiliation. He questioned my morals and called me names that would have broken the old Elena. But the new Elena just stared at the screen, feeling nothing but cold contempt. I did not reply to him. Instead, I sent a single text message to Rose. I wrote that I would be coming to the house tomorrow at 7 in the evening to resolve everything permanently in front of the family. I turned off my phone, ready for the final act. I spent the entire afternoon meticulously constructing my armor. I refused to walk back into that house looking like the devastated, discarded wife they expected to see. I chose my most tailored dress, a sharp, midnight blue piece that hugged my curves and projected authority, and applied my makeup with the precision of a surgeon. I painted my lips a deep crimson, concealing the pale exhaustion that the morning sickness had left behind. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was not a victim. She was a force of nature. Before heading to the suburbs, I made one final stop at the bank. I walked up to the teller and requested to withdraw the entirety of my personal savings in a cashier's check. It was $50,000, a sum I had scraped together over 2 years by skipping lunches and taking extra freelance consultations. I had intended to give it to Daniel next week to pay off his business loans and give his startup one last fighting chance. Now, that money had a very different purpose. It was no longer a lifeline for him. It was a war chest for me and my child. My lawyer had strongly advised against this confrontation. He warned me that returning to the scene of the humiliation could escalate things dangerously, especially given Daniel's volatile state. But I told him that some things could not be settled in a courtroom. I needed to look Daniel in the eye when his world crumbled. I needed the audience he had assembled to see the truth, not just hear about it from a legal brief months later. Inside the lake house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Sarah later told me that Daniel had been drinking steadily since noon, fortifying his courage with bourbon. He had convinced himself and everyone else that I was coming to beg for forgiveness. He told his mother that I would probably confess to everything and plead for a second chance. But he was going to be strong enough to turn me away. Rose, however, was not so sure. She moved around the living room with nervous energy, quietly removing the heavy crystal ashtrays and sliding the letter opener into a drawer, sensing that the violence in the air was a spark away from igniting. At exactly 7 o'clock, I turned my car into the driveway. I did not park on the street. I pulled right up to the front entrance and left the high beams on, flooding the living room window with blinding white light. It was a theatrical entrance, designed to announce that I was not sneaking back in shame. I was arriving to take center stage. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my heels. I was not carrying the divorce papers he had demanded. Instead, I held the thick black leather portfolio containing the evidence of his ruin in my left hand, and in my right. I clutched a small square box wrapped in red velvet. I walked through the front door, which had been left unlocked, and entered the lion's den. They were all there, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins who had whispered about me just yesterday. They sat in a semicircle around the living room like a jury waiting to deliver a verdict. Daniel was sprawled on the armchair in the center, a glass in his hand, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. When he saw me, a smirk curled on his lips, smug and cruel. "So," he slurred, leaning back with exaggerated ease. "You are finally here. Are you ready to admit what you did, or are you going to keep lying to my face?" I did not say a word. I walked past the silent relatives and approached the coffee table where the divorce papers still lay. I placed the black portfolio down with a heavy thud, and next to it, I set the red velvet box. Then, I sat down on the sofa opposite him, crossed my legs, and fixed him with a gaze so cold and devoid of fear that his smirk faltered. He sat up straighter, the glass trembling slightly in his hand, as the realization dawned on him that I was not there to surrender. I was there to execute him. "You wanted evidence of my movements." "Daniel," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a shard of ice. "You wanted to know where I was every single minute of those weekends. I am going to show you." I reached into the leather portfolio and tossed the first file onto the table. It slid across the glass surface and stopped right in front of his drink. He stared at it, hesitating, as if he knew that touching it would burn him. "Open it," I commanded. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were the time-stamped security logs from the Grand Meridian and the sworn affidavit from Marcus and Eleanor. "You accused me of sleeping with Marcus," I continued, addressing the room as much as him. "You dragged a man's reputation through the mud based on your own insecurity. Marcus has been happily married for 20 years. He is also gay, Daniel. He has been out to his friends and family for decades. He looks at me like a little sister." I pointed to the document with the heavy legal seal. "That is a statement from his wife, Eleanor, confirming he was with her at the charity gala on the nights you claimed I was with him, and that letter behind it is from their family attorney, threatening a defamation lawsuit for the lies you spewed yesterday." Daniel turned the pages frantically, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for a loophole, a mistake, anything to cling to. But the stamps were authentic, the signatures notarized. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. I did not give him time to recover. I pulled the second file from my bag. This one was thicker, filled with spreadsheets and bank transfer records. "You told everyone here that I was spending our money on a secret lover," I said, my voice rising slightly. fueled by the injustice of it all. You said I was draining our accounts for hotel rooms and expensive gifts. You were right about the money disappearing. Daniel. But you were wrong about where it went. I slammed the file down on top of the first one. Look at the beneficiary, I said. He looked. His eyes widened in horror. The highlighted rows showed transfers of thousands of dollars, not to a hotel, not to a jewelry store, but to a generic holding account labeled Daniel Vance Emergency Relief. The room erupted in whispers. I saw his father, Frank, lean forward, squinting at the papers on the table. Rose put a hand to her chest, her eyes darting from me to her son with a dawning, terrified realization. Daniel began to sweat profusely, beads of perspiration forming on his forehead. I have been silently paying off your gambling debts and your failed cryptocurrency loans for 6 months, I declared, letting the words hang in the air. Every time you lost money, I covered it. Every time you missed a payment on the business loan you took out against this house without telling me, I paid it. I was working 80 hours a week not to impress a lover, but to keep the bank from foreclosing on our home. I was saving you from ruin while you were busy writing a script about how I was a whore. No, Daniel stammered. Standing up so quickly he knocked his scotch glass over. The amber liquid spilled across the table, soaking the edges of the papers. That is not true. These are fake. She forged them. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but the faces staring back at him were cold. Stop lying. Daniel! A voice rang out from the corner. It was Sarah. She stood up, her face wet with tears, but her voice steady. I went to your office today, she said, looking straight at her brother. It is gone. The landlord told me he evicted you 30 days ago. You have not had a business in months. The silence that followed was absolute. The image of the successful entrepreneur, the wronged husband, the victim of a cruel wife, shattered into a million pieces right there on the Persian rug. He was exposed, naked in his failures, standing amidst the wreckage of his own making. He looked at his parents, then at me, and for the first time, I saw the arrogance completely vanish, replaced by the terrified look of a man who knew he had lost everything. Daniel was cornered, trapped by the paper trail of his own failures, but a cornered animal is often the most vicious. He refused to accept the defeat that was staring him in the face. Instead of looking at the bank statements that proved his deceit, he lashed out, his face twisted in a desperate, ugly snarl. So what if I lost some money? He screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. That does not explain everything. You have been cold to me for weeks. You pull away when I touch you. You are still hiding something. Elena, I know you are. You are keeping secrets. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the last thread of affection snap. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and graceful, and reached for the small square box wrapped in red velvet that I had placed on the table when I arrived. You are right, Daniel, I said, my voice calm and terrifyingly level. I have been hiding something from you, something I planned to tell you on my birthday, right before you decided to destroy me. I lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled in white satin, was a plastic stick showing 2 distinct pink lines and a glossy black and white photograph. I turned the box so the contents faced him, holding it like a weapon. I am not cold. Daniel, I said, I am exhausted. I have been vomiting every morning for 6 weeks. I have been tired because I have been working double shifts to pay off the gambling debts you hid from me, all while my body is trying to grow a human being. The silence that descended on the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Then, a sound broke it. Rose let out a high, keen wail and covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming instantly down her face. Daniel stopped breathing. He stared at the ultrasound picture as if he were looking at a ghost. His eyes bulged, and the color drained from his skin until he looked like a corpse. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunting shock. I reached into the box and pulled out the medical report I had retrieved that morning. I pointed to a date highlighted in neon orange. "Look at the conception date," I commanded. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, that weekend at the cabin, the only time we were happy. "This baby is yours, Daniel." A tremor went through his body. His hand shook violently as he reached out, his fingers stretching toward the photograph, desperate to touch the proof of the life he had helped create. He looked like a starving man reaching for bread. "No!" I snapped, pulling the box back out of his reach with a sharp jerk. My voice was a whip crack in the silent room. "You do not get to touch it. You do not get to hold it. You lost that right when you accused the mother of your child of being a whore in front of your entire family." I picked up the yellow envelope containing the divorce papers he had thrown at me just 48 hours ago. I tossed it onto the table next to the pile of evidence of his lies. It landed with a final, dismissive slap. "You wanted a divorce. Daniel," I said, looking down at him. "You wanted me out of your life." "I agree." The fight went out of him all at once. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the rug, falling to his knees with a heavy thud. He did not look like a man anymore. He looked like a ruin. He began to sob, ugly, gasping sounds that echoed off the high ceiling. He crawled toward me, grabbing at the air near my feet, his face wet with tears and snot. "Elena, please," he wailed, his voice broken. I did not know. I was stressed. The business was failing. I was depressed. "Please. I am so sorry. Do not do this. We can fix this." I looked down at him with dry eyes. This weeping, broken creature was the same man who had stood tall and arrogant just 2 days ago, mocking me, destroying my reputation with a smirk on his face. The contrast was sickening. He was not crying because he hurt me. He was crying because he had played a game of chicken with the truth, and the truth had just run him over. Rose was the first to find her voice amidst the wreckage of her son's dignity. She wiped her eyes and stepped toward me, her hands clasped in a pleading gesture that made her look small and frail. "Elena, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "You cannot leave now. Not with a baby on the way. Every child needs a father. You have to think about the family." Frank nodded beside her, his earlier anger at Daniel replaced by a desperate need to salvage the reputation of his lineage. He mumbled something about working things out and forgiving mistakes for the greater good. I looked at them, feeling a pang of pity that was quickly extinguished by the memory of their silence 2 days ago. They had watched me be crucified without intervening, and now they wanted to appeal to my sense of duty. I shook my head slowly. A man who suspects his wife of infidelity based on his own insecurities and humiliates her in front of a crowd does not deserve to be a father, I declared, my voice ringing with finality. He forfeited that title the moment he decided to value his ego over our marriage. I turned my gaze back to Daniel, who was still weeping on the floor. "There is something else you should know," I said. "The bank is going to foreclose on this house next month. The notices have been going to his office, the one that no longer exists. I withdrew my savings today, not to pay your debts, Daniel, but to secure a future for myself and my child. I am not saving you this time. You are on your own." I signaled to my lawyer, who had been standing silently by the door, to hand me the final document. I placed it on the table. "This is a child support agreement and a custody arrangement," I stated. "You have no money now, but you will sign this acknowledging that when you do, you will pay. Until then, your visitation rights are supervised and restricted. Sign it, or I will take you to court and ensure you never see this child at all." I turned to Rose one last time. "I am sorry, Rose," I said softly. "I know you wanted grandchildren, and you will see your grandchild, but not here, not in this house of lies. Your son killed the love I had for him with his own paranoia. It is dead, and no amount of apology can resurrect it." Suddenly, Sarah moved across the room. She did not go to her brother. She came to me. She wrapped her arms around me in a fierce hug, sobbing into my shoulder. "You are doing the right thing, Elena," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do not look back." Her support was the final blow to the family unit, a crack that would likely never heal. I stepped back from the embrace and looked down at the floor. Daniel had crawled forward and gripped the hem of my midnight blue dress. His knuckles were white, his grip desperate, as if I were the only thing keeping him from falling off the edge of the earth. "Elena, please," he choked out. I did not yell. I did not kick him away. I simply reached down and, with cold, clinical precision, peeled his fingers off my fabric one by one. It was a slow, deliberate action that symbolized the complete severance of our bond. I dropped his hand, and it fell limply to the rug. I gathered the original documents back into my black leather portfolio, leaving only the photocopies scattered on the table for them to obsess over. I wanted to make sure he could not destroy the evidence once the reality of his situation truly set in. I took one last look around the room. It was the same room where I had celebrated holidays, where we had opened Christmas presents, and where my birthday party had turned into a funeral for my marriage. The warmth was gone, replaced by the chill of absolute ruin. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. Behind me, the sound of Daniel's wailing intensified, a raw, animalistic sound of regret that came too late. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the shattered remains of the Vance family behind me, and I did not look back. As I walked away, the wind hit my face, but for the first time in months, I did not feel the chill. I felt a weightlessness that was almost dizzying. The suffocating cloud of suspicion and anger that had hovered over me had finally dissipated, left behind in that living room along with the remnants of my marriage. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching rhythmically under my heels, sounding like the ticking of a clock starting a new era. I slid into the leather seat and locked the doors, creating a sanctuary of silence. I placed my hand gently on my stomach, feeling the warmth of the life growing inside me. I whispered a quiet apology to the tiny soul, telling him that I was sorry his father was a broken man who could not be the parent he deserved. But I also made a vow. I promised him that I would be enough. I would be strong enough, successful enough, and loving enough for the both of us. My phone on the passenger seat began to buzz relentlessly, lighting up the dark interior with Daniel's name. Message after message rolled in, begging for forgiveness, promising change, swearing he was drunk and confused. I did not read a single one. I popped the back of the phone open, removed the SIM card, and rolled down the window. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed the small chip into a trash can on the curb. The buzzing stopped. The silence was beautiful. As I drove away, I allowed myself one brief moment of grief for the 7 years we had spent together. I thought about our wedding day, the lazy Sunday mornings, and the dreams we had built. Killing that love felt like amputating a limb without anesthesia, a necessary agony to ensure survival. I had to cut him out to save myself and my child from the infection of his toxicity. It was not cruelty, it was self-preservation. I drove straight to the city center, to a high-rise luxury apartment complex I had leased just yesterday using the bonus from the Aura design contract. It was modern, bright, and completely mine. No mortgages hidden behind my back, no gambling debts, just clean lines and a view of the skyline that promised infinite possibilities. The next morning, I walked into the office with my head held high. Marcus met me by the elevator, his eyes scanning my face for cracks in the armor. He looked worried, expecting to see a woman falling apart. Instead, I smiled, a genuine expression that reached my eyes. I told him I was fine. In fact, I was better than I had ever been. The dead weight was gone, and I was ready to fly. My lawyer called later that afternoon. Daniel had signed the papers. He was broken, defeated, and had checked himself into a rehab facility for alcohol abuse and severe depression. The news of his public meltdown and financial fraud had spread through our social circles like wildfire. He had lost his reputation, his friends, and his credibility. Meanwhile, my career skyrocketed. I became known not as the victim of a scandal, but as the woman who walked through fire and came out made of gold. 6 months later, I stood in the middle of the nursery, the afternoon sun streaming through the sheer curtains. The room was painted a soft sage green, and the crib was assembled and waiting. I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror. My belly was round and heavy with life, but my face was radiant. I saw a woman who was independent, fierce, and profoundly happy. I realized then that the best revenge was not the shouting match or the legal battle. It was this. It was living a beautiful, full life without him. I would never forgive him, and I would never go back. Daniel would have to live the rest of his life knowing he had held perfection in his hands and smashed it because he was too insecure to hold on tight. He would live in the hell of his own regret, and that was a far more brutal punishment than anything I could ever inflict. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below and let us know where you are tuning in from, as we love to connect with our listeners from all over the world. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.